Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really embarking on quite a journey, aren't we? We're looking at leadership across, well, vast stretches of time and different cultures.
Absolutely. We've got ancient philosophy from Greece and Rome, wisdom from Eastern thinkers like Confucius and Lao Tzu.
And then we jump right into the modern world, places like Pixar,
Yeah.
strategies of Navy SEALs, even the foundations of American political thought.
It's a really broad sweep, and the goal, I think, is to try and synthesize all of this, to find those, enduring principles of leadership, what actually works across contexts.
What makes leadership effective, but also ethical and sustainable, important.
Exactly. Not just for a year or two, but over the long haul, whether you're, say, running a company or leading a small team or even governing.
And it seems like there's a core tension right from the start in these materials. This conflict between, let's say, personal virtue, doing the right thing,
The moral side.
and then the practical demands, organizational effectiveness, strategic needs, sometimes just plain survival.
That pull between what's right and what seems, well, expedient. Necessary, even.
Yeah, that's the tightrope walk, isn't it? That seems to be the heart of so much of this discussion.
So maybe the best place to start is way back with Aristotle. He talks about the good life, eudaimonia.
Often translated as happiness or flourishing.
Right. But it's crucial to understand, for Aristotle, this isn't just a fleeting feeling. It requires a complete life. You can't just have a good week.
He had that line, didn't he? One swallow does not make a spring. You need consistency over time.
Precisely. And the engine for that flourishing, he says it's expressed through virtue, specifically the best and most complete virtue.
Okay, but virtue itself isn't just one thing for him, is it? He breaks it down.
He does, yeah. And this is where it gets really interesting for leadership. He splits virtue into two main classes.
Sure.
You've got the ethical virtues first. These are about character things like justice, courage, temperance. They're habits, essentially, that we develop through practice. They govern how we act, how we interact,
Okay, the practical day-to-day stuff.
sort of. But then there are the virtues of thought, the intellectual virtues. And here he distinguishes between practical wisdom, phronesis, and theoretical wisdom, Sophia.
Ah, so practical wisdom is like knowing how to act well in specific situations. Good judgment.
Exactly. Street smarts combined with ethical grounding, maybe. And theoretical wisdom is more about understanding fundamental truths, the big picture, philosophical insight.
And this creates a dilemma for leaders, doesn't it? What's the highest expression of human function, according to Aristotle? Is it being excellent practical action, or is it achieving that deeper theoretical understanding?
That's the million-dollar question he wrestles with. Is the peak of human excellence found in governing justly and effectively day to day, using practical wisdom? Or is it in the contemplation of higher truths, expressing theoretical wisdom, even if that's detached from immediate results?
So the active versus the contemplative life, in a way.
In a sense, yes. And where a leader puts their emphasis, well, that shapes everything. Too much focus on theory, maybe you lose touch with the ground realities, the ethical messiness.
But focus only on the practical, the immediate action. And you might lack that deeper understanding, that guiding philosophy. You could end up just, implementing flawed ideas really efficiently.
It's a tough balance. Now, if Aristotle gives us the what of virtue, Cicero really hammers home the how in terms of application, especially in leadership. He comes from a more stoic perspective.
And his big thing is that expediency and morality can never, ever clash.
Never. It's an absolute stance. He points back to Socrates, who apparently condemned anyone trying to separate what's useful or expedient from what's fundamentally right.
So if a leader faces a choice, say, a shortcut that seems beneficial but is morally dubious.
Cicero's answer is crystal clear. If it's morally wrong, it cannot be truly expedient. Any apparent benefit is an illusion, a miscalculation.
That's a powerful idea. It reframes the choice entirely.
Right.
It's not, do I choose the right path or the beneficial path? It's, if it's wrong, it's not actually beneficial.
Exactly. He believes that fundamental misunderstanding, thinking you can gain lasting advantage through wrongdoing, is the root of major crimes. Things like assassinations, grabbing too much wealth, seizing power illegitimately.
They all stem from believing a morally wrong action can somehow lead to a genuinely good outcome.
Right. Cicero basically forces leaders to see moral integrity not just as a virtue, but as the most practical, the most truly expedient path to sustainable, legitimate power and success.
That really sets a high bar. Let's shift gears now and head east. How do thinkers like Confucius approach this? It feels like a different emphasis.
It is. Confucius focuses much more on the leader's personal character and its influence, less on rigid rules, more on moral gravity.
His idea of the Junzi, the exemplary person.
Yes. The core teaching is that if the leader cultivates their own excellence, their day, then governing well doesn't require force or harsh measures. He uses that metaphor. The leader's virtue is like the wind.
And the people are like grass, they naturally bend in that direction.
Precisely. The leader's inner state shapes the outer reality. It implies that the most effective form of control is self-control, moral self-cultivation by the leader.
It's leadership by example, fundamentally.
Absolutely. And he even gets practical about the leader's lifestyle. There's a line in the Analects, something like, "It is better to be miserly than immodest." He champions frugality.
Which connects back to Cicero's warning about excessive wealth, restraint as a leadership virtue.
It models the right behavior and guards against corruption. Now, if Confucius is the guiding wind, Lao Tzu, with the Tao Te Ching, takes us towards, well, almost non-interference. Wu Wei.
Action through inaction. That sounds paradoxical for a leader.
It does, especially in our hyperactive world. Lao Tzu talks about the Tao, the Wei. It's this underlying natural order, unchanging, pervasive, the source of everything.
And the leader's role is to align with this way.
Yes, largely by getting out of the way. Chapter 24 specifically criticizes those who show off, who are self-promoting or self-satisfied. He says they do no good or they never grow up. The follower of the way avoids that kind of ego-driven action.
So how does a modern leader practice Wu Wei? It sounds passive.
It's not really passive. It's more about designing systems, creating environments where the right things happen naturally rather than through constant, forceful intervention. Think of a gardener tending the soil versus constantly yanking plants around.
So less micromanaging, more enabling, cultivating conditions.
Exactly. And it builds trust. Lao Tzu has that direct line. To give no trust is to get no trust. If you're always intervening, always controlling, you signal distrust.
Which breeds resentment and dependence.
Right. The ideal Taoist leader is almost invisible. The people achieve success and feel like they did it themselves because the leader facilitated it subtly.
That idea of designing the environment leads us perfectly into the modern corporate world and how structure can foster these virtues. Pixar is a great example.
Oh, definitely. The Steve Jobs building there wasn't just about looking cool. It was intentionally designed to force interaction.
The central atrium, right?
Right.
With everything located there, mailboxes, cafeteria, even the bathrooms.
Especially the bathrooms. It sounds funny, but the idea was to break down silos, to make the animator bump into the coder, the writer bump into the executive, purely by chance multiple times a day.
Because those unplanned conversations are where creative sparks happen.
That was the bet. That friction, those water cooler moments, that's where ideas get shared early, maybe challenged before people get too invested in their own isolated track. The architecture itself was meant to drive collaboration and community.
And out of that environment came some famous principles,
Yeah.
like story is king and trust the process.
Yes, those became mantras. But interestingly, the Pixar leadership, especially Ed Catmull, also warns against relying too heavily on maxims, even successful ones.
Why? If they work, why not stick to them?
Because they can become a substitute for thinking. They can stifle fresh perspectives. The most dangerous version of this is looking backward.
Like the what would Walt do problem at Disney.
Exactly. After Walt Disney died, that question apparently paralyzed the company. People were so reverent, so afraid to deviate from what they thought Walt would have wanted, that innovation ground to a halt. It created this pervasive fear of change.
And Steve Jobs saw that.
He saw it and actively fought against it at Apple. He apparently told people not to ask, what would Steve do after he was gone? The lesson is clear. Clinging to past formulas, even successful ones, is death to creativity and growth. You have to keep questioning.
So structure needs to encourage interaction, but also allow for adaptation and fresh thinking. How do large organizations maintain alignment without stifling initiative? We see things like OKRs being used.
Right, objectives and key results. This is a modern framework trying to solve that alignment problem, especially in big, complex companies. Think about Unilever with its huge global workforce. They use things like their Compass framework and specific plans to try and connect everyone to the mission.
And OKRs are a tool for making that connection concrete.
Yeah, they help translate those big, high-level goals, like, say, Intuit wanting to rationalize, modernize, and secure their tech into specific, measurable actions for individual teams.
So the team in, Bangalore knows how their work contributes to the same big goal as the team in California.
That's the idea. It creates cohesiveness. But the real power proponents argue, comes from shared OKRs.
Shared horizontally across departments.
Exactly. Instead of marketing having its goals and engineering having its separate goals and needing requests to go up and down the chain, shared OKRs force them to align their objectives from the start.
Which should speed things up dramatically.
Hmm.
No more waiting weeks for approvals between silos.
Right. It enables quicker, coordinated decisions, which is obviously a huge competitive advantage. And good OKR systems also emphasize bottom-up contributions.
Meaning not all objectives are dictated from the top.
Ideally, yeah. Maybe aiming for roughly half the OKRs to originate from the teams themselves, because often the best ideas, the real innovations, come from the people closest to the work, at the edges, not from the center.
That idea that centralized control is often too slow and lacks ground-level insight that resonates strongly with what the military, particularly elite units like the Navy SEALs, discovered.
Oh, absolutely. The modern battlefield, especially complex urban environments, just became impossible to manage from a single command point. SEAL leaders found that one person simply cannot track everything, cannot make every decision for a large group in real time.
Micromanagement just falls apart under that kind of pressure.
It completely did not work, as they put it. The cognitive load is too high, so they shifted.
To decentralized command.
Right. The leader's role changes. You're not the puppet master pulling every string. You're the architect who sets the overall goal, the why. That's commander's intent.
You define the mission's purpose, the desired end state.
Exactly. And then you trust your subordinate leaders, who are closer to the action, to figure out the how, using their judgment and standard operating procedures.
Which gives them enormous flexibility and speed.
Huge amounts. They can react instantly to changing conditions without waiting for permission. It's about empowering the edge.
It's fascinating how similar that sounds to Clausewitz's thinking on small war from centuries ago. He also talked about leveraging local conditions and the need for initiative.
He did. Clausewitz saw that smaller, perhaps irregular forces often had advantages like local support and being near their supply sources. But tactically, he stressed that even if you're strategically on the defensive trying to avoid big, decisive battles, you still need to be able to attack opportunistically.
To seize the initiative when the enemy makes a mistake.
Precisely. You have to be ready and empowered to strike quickly to capitalize on errors. That requires decentralized decision-making and aggressive action at the lower levels.
This tension between central control and distributed power plays out politically, too. Thinking about the framing of the U.S. government, the Federalist versus Anti-Federalist debates.
Classic example. The Federalists, in the Federalist Papers, argued that a large republic was actually better at controlling factions, those competing interest groups.
How so?
Their reasoning was that in a large, diverse country, it's harder for any single faction to gain enough power to oppress others. You have more competing interests, which dilutes the power of any one group. Plus, you have representatives, hopefully with enlightened views, acting as a filter.
So size and representation were seen as safeguards for stability.
That was the argument. But the Anti-Federalists had a powerful counter-argument, a deep suspicion of centralized power becoming too remote.
They worried about accountability.
Very much so. They feared that in a vast republic, the top officials, those controlling the military, the treasury, the power to pardon, would inevitably become detached from the people, potentially abusing their power to enrich themselves or consolidate control.
It's that fundamental trade-off again. The efficiency and stability potentially offered by centralization versus the risk of unaccountable power.
It's a tension that runs through almost every form of organization, isn't it?
So we have these structures, these organizational designs, but ultimately leadership comes down to individual choices, especially when facing conflict or tough moral decisions. And our sources offer dramatically different paths here.
They really do. Let's go back to Cicero and that uncompromising Roman standard. The story of Regulus is just stark.
Captured by Carthage, sent back to Rome on oath to negotiate a prisoner swap, but with the condition that he had to return if negotiations failed.
Right, and he gets to the Roman Senate and argues against the exchange, believing it would benefit Carthage more and weaken Roman resolve.
Even though it meant his own certain death upon return.
Exactly. He put the perceived good of Rome and the sanctity of his oath above his own life. He went back to Carthage and, according to the stories, faced a horrific death. It's the ultimate example of principle over expediency.
And it wasn't just him. The Senate itself made a similar calculation after the disastrous Battle of Cannae.
Yes, they had thousands of Roman soldiers captured. The Carthaginians offered to ransom them back relatively cheaply. It seemed expedient get experienced soldiers back.
But the Senate refused.
They refused. Their rationale was that the principle teaching soldiers that they must win or die, never surrender expecting rescue, was more valuable to Rome's long-term strength than saving those 8,000 men. It's an incredibly harsh calculus.
It really is. It feels almost alien to our modern sensibilities. Which I suppose brings us directly to Machiavelli.
The complete opposite perspective, really. Machiavelli, writing The Prince, basically says that kind of rigid adherence to virtue is naive and dangerous for a ruler.
He argued a prince needs to know how to do wrong.
Yes, and crucially, to make use of it or not according to necessity. For Machiavelli, the primary goal is maintaining power and stability for the state. Morality is secondary to that.
So sometimes actions that look like vices might actually be necessary for security and prosperity.
That's his argument. He suggests that sticking to virtue might actually lead to the ruler's downfall, while embracing calculated cruelty or deception when necessary could be the key to survival. It's pure pragmatism, stripped of idealism.
It's a view that seems to align with Thomas Hobbes's rather bleak assessment of human nature.
Very much so. Hobbes saw humans as fundamentally driven by a relentless desire for power, a desire that only ends with death. Forget inherent goodness.
And in that world, value and honor are just about perceived power.
Pretty much. Hobbes says honor consisteth only in the opinion of power. If people think you're powerful, they'll honor you, regardless of how you got that power. Your worth is simply your price, what someone would pay to use your power.
It justifies a pretty ruthless approach to leadership.
It certainly can. And we see a real-world example of this kind of ruthless power play in Robert Caro's depiction of Robert Moses in New York.
The master builder who needed control over the Triborough Authority Board.
Exactly. He needed a third vote to guarantee control, and there was one board member, a principled Quaker named Jones, standing in his way. Moses didn't try to persuade him on the merits.
He went for the jugular.
He used threats, insults, and crucially, the suggestion of scandal. Caro documented how Moses hinted at financial messes involving Jones, even though these apparently didn't exist.
Manufacturing a threat to reputation.
Precisely. He forced Jones into a corner, resign quietly or face public disgrace, however fabricated. Jones resigned. Moses got his vote. It was a calculated use of fear and manipulation, the opinion of power, to achieve his goal.
That kind of conflict, whether it's internal moral struggle or external power plays, creates immense stress. How does one navigate that without resorting to Moses-like tactics? The Bhagavad Gita offers a very different perspective.
It does. The Gita talks about the ideal state of being conscious, which involves transcending the dualities of the material world.
Things like heat and cold, happiness and misery, success and failure.
Yes, those pairs that constantly pull us emotionally. The idea is to act based on duty, dharma, for a higher purpose without being attached to the results. Whether you succeed or fail in worldly terms becomes less important. You remain steady.
How does that translate for a leader who isn't necessarily religious? What's the practical takeaway?
I think it's about detaching the ego from the outcome. If your actions are driven by principle and the mission itself, rather than a desperate need for personal success or fear of failure, you can make clearer, less emotionally biased decisions. Think back to Regulus. That kind of detachment seems necessary for such a choice.
On a more interpersonal level, there's practical advice too. The book Crucial Conversations tackles conflict directly. They talk about avoiding the fool's choice.
Right. The fool's choice is that trap we fall into under pressure, thinking we only have two bad options. Either stay silent and let the problem fester, or speak up aggressively and damage the relationship's silence or violence.
And their way out is the and question.
Yeah, it's about reframing the problem for your brain. Instead of, should I be honest or should I be kind, you ask, how can I be honest and kind? Or how can we have this difficult conversation and strengthen our working relationship?
It forces a move from a defensive binary mindset to a more creative problem-solving one, trying to achieve both objectives.
Exactly. Seeking integration rather than compromise or conflict. It requires skill, but it opens up better possibilities.
Ultimately, though, to withstand the pressures pushing towards Machiavellian tactics, maybe a leader needs some kind of ethical bedrock, an absolute line they won't cross.
Frederick Douglass made this point incredibly powerfully when he wrote about the Christianity practiced by slaveholders in the American South.
He saw it as a distortion, a cover.
Worse than that, he called it a mere covering for the most horrid crimes. He argued that slave owners who were outwardly religious, like a Mr. Freeland or a Reverend Whedon he knew, often used their faith to justify their brutality, to make themselves feel righteous while committing atrocities.
So the religion actually made them worse, in his view, more hypocritical.
Yeah, he found them often the most cruel and cowardly. It showed that external adherence to a moral code means nothing if the internal character is corrupt. No policy, no structure can fix that fundamental lack of integrity.
Which brings us back to that core idea, famously put by Emerson. What you are shouts so loudly in my ears that I cannot hear what you say.
That's the essence of the character ethic that Stephen Covey championed. Your character communicates more powerfully than anything you say or do. Integrity isn't just nice to have, it's the absolute foundation for trust.
And without trust, you can't really achieve sustainable success, certainly not the win-win scenarios Covey talks about.
Exactly. If people don't trust your fundamental character, no amount of charm, technique, or even short-term wins will build lasting, effective relationships or organizations.
So if character is foundational, how do leaders and organizations actually grow? Especially in creative fields, it seems embracing failure is key. Pixar, again, seems to have thought deeply about this.
They really did. They deliberately reframed failure not as something bad, but as an investment, part of the process.
Not a necessary evil, but an inevitable consequence of trying new things.
Precisely. Ed Catmull said, if you're not making mistakes, you're not being ambitious enough. You're sticking too close to the known. So mistakes should be seen almost like R&D costs the price of innovation.
This led to that mantra from Andrew Stanton. Fail early and fail fast. Or be wrong as fast as you can.
It sounds counterintuitive, but it's about rapid learning through iteration. Stanton used the analogy of learning to ride a bike. You don't study it for months. You get on, you fall, you adjust, you fall again, quickly. Hesitation is the enemy.
You learn by doing, even if the initial doing is clumsy or wrong.
Right. You put ideas out there quickly, get feedback, even harsh feedback, and adapt. You don't wait for perfection before you start.
But this embrace of failure can't be limitless, can it? Especially on huge projects like a Pixar film. When does a leader need to step in if a project is just stuck?
There's a key indicator they looked for. The director losing the confidence of the crew.
Not just the executives, but the actual team doing the work.
Exactly. The brain trusts the group of senior creatives would give notes. But if the director couldn't effectively process those notes and provide clear direction, the crew would sense it. They'd stop being productive, waiting for clarity.
Because they realized the director was as lost as they were.
Pretty much. If the director kept coming back after feedback sessions with essentially the same flawed structure, it showed they weren't making the hard choices needed to fix it. That loss of confidence from the hundreds of people working on the film was the signal that intervention was necessary.
That requires a leader who's attuned not just to the project, but to the team's morale and belief.
Absolutely. Now, underlying all this strategy, creativity, handling failure, is understanding what actually drives people. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is fundamental here.
We all know the pyramid diagram, roughly. Physiological needs, safety, belonging, esteem, self-actualization.
Right. But the key insight Maslow stressed was that these aren't just separate items on a checklist. They form a hierarchy of specificity. Our fundamental desires are broad categories.
Can you unpack that a bit?
Sure. You might have a basic, broad need for, say, gratification or safety, but that general need translates into much more specific desires in the moment, maybe a craving for a specific food, or the need for reassurance in a particular relationship. Leaders need to understand they're dealing with these deeper, often unconscious categories of motivation, not just surface-level requests.
Okay, so Maslow outlines the needs. But Viktor Frankl adds another layer, the importance of striving, of tension.
Yes, Frankl, coming from his experiences in concentration camps, argued strongly against the idea that the primary human drive is pleasure or comfort. He believed mental health actually requires a degree of tension.
Tension between what we are and what we could be.
Exactly. The gap between what you've achieved and what you feel you ought to achieve, the potential meaning you need to fulfill. He saw this striving, this purposeful tension, as essential for a meaningful life. Leaders, in his view, shouldn't just try to make people comfortable. They should challenge them to reach for that potential meaning.
That's a powerful counterpoint to just focusing on, say, employee satisfaction in a superficial way.
It is. But all this internal drive, understanding motivation, it's only effective if your basic perception of reality is accurate. This brings us to Stephen Covey's analogy of the map and the territory.
Meaning, our mental model, our paradigm, might not match the actual world.
Precisely. Your paradigm is your map. If you have the wrong map, say, you're genuinely trying hard to navigate Chicago, but you're using a detailed, perfectly drawn map of Detroit.
You're going to end up very lost no matter how hard you try or how positive your attitude is.
Exactly. Trying harder just gets you to the wrong place faster. Covey emphasized that leaders must constantly examine their own paradigms, their fundamental assumptions, before they even think about strategy or techniques. Is my map accurate?
And tied to that, he warned against having the wrong center for your life, which creates instability.
Yeah, he identified several common but ultimately flawed centers, being money-centered, work-centered, possession-centered, pleasure-centered, even spouse-centered or family-centered, if taken to an extreme.
Why are these flawed for a leader?
Because they make your sense of self-worth dependent on external, often fluctuating factors. If you're money-centered, your self-esteem rises and falls with the market. If you're work-centered, a layoff can destroy your identity.
So you lack a stable core.
Exactly. There's no constant anchor. Your moods, your decisions, your security are all vulnerable to things outside your control. Covey argued for being principle-centered, anchoring your identity in timeless, unchanging principles like integrity, fairness, human dignity. That provides the stability needed for consistent, ethical leadership.
Okay, we've covered a massive amount of ground. Ancient philosophy, Eastern wisdom, corporate innovation, military strategy, psychology. If we try to boil it down, what are maybe 2 or 3 core takeaways that seem to hold true across all these diverse sources?
Well, one is certainly that idea of maturity that Covey highlights the balance of courage and consideration. You need the courage to act, to speak truth, to make hard decisions, but you also need the consideration to listen, to understand, to empathize. It's that blend.
High courage, high consideration. Got it. What else?
Second, the vital importance of decentralized execution combined with clear, unifying intent. Whether it's commander's intent for the SEALs or well-defined OKRs at a tech company, you need to empower people close to the action, but ensure everyone is pulling towards the same overarching goal: speed and alignment.
Empower the edge, but make sure the edge knows where it's going.
Perfectly put. And third, I think, is that difficult but recurring theme: the ultimate necessity of choosing the right path over the seemingly expedient one. Cicero, Regulus, Douglas, Covey, they all point to integrity as non-negotiable for long-term legitimacy and trust.
Even when it's incredibly costly in the short term.
Especially then. And maybe one final point, a dose of humility. Remembering, as the Pixar folks emphasized, that luck and chance play a role. Attributing every success purely to your own genius is dangerous. It leads to flawed assessments down the road.
Acknowledging uncertainty keeps you grounded.
Right. It allows for more realistic decision-making.
Okay, that brings us to our final thought for you, the listener, to mull over this week. We've talked about aligning actions with principles, about having the right map for the territory. So here's the question.
If the ultimate goal of effective leadership is achieving results while maintaining integrity, what current endeavor are you pursuing in your work, in your life, that might be governed by the wrong paradigm? Where might you be using a map of Detroit when you're actually trying to navigate Chicago?
And, perhaps more importantly, what courage might be required for you to admit that potential ignorance, to question your map, and to start redrawing the boundaries based on principle and reality?